ahead and get started. It's 6:31. Good evening, everyone. This is a public hearing in case number 19-0252-Rule, which involves a petition from the Vermont Department of Public Service to amend Public Utility Commission Rule 3.700. My name is Micah Howe, and I'm a staff attorney at the Public Utility Commission. Although this rulemaking was initiated by a petition from the Department of Public Service, the legislature actually passed an Act 79 last session, which also requires us to undergo this rulemaking. And in that act, they also prescribe some specific requirements for the rule changes. For those not familiar with the proposed changes, Act 79 requires the Commission to revise Rule 3.700 to include what's called one-touch make-ready and self-help procedures for entities seeking to put their equipment on utility poles. This will allow attaching entities to do some of the work to prepare utility poles for their attachments using qualified contractors in certain situations. The provisions were drafted to loosely parallel recent revisions to the federal rules governing pole attachment from the Federal Communications Commission. The purpose of tonight's public hearing is to hear from you, the members of the public, about the proposed changes to Rule 3.700. Today's hearing is not the only opportunity to submit comments. We have a second public hearing scheduled next week in Montpelier. You can also provide written comments using the Commission's Electronic Document Management System, PUC, which is available online using the links on the Commission's website by direct mail, or you can email your comments to the clerk's office. Please be sure to reference the case number 19-0252-Rule when submitting your comments. You can also subscribe to the case in PUC, which means you will receive email notifications related to the rulemaking. We usually have handouts at our public hearing, and I gathered them all together back in Montpelier before I left the office and then left them sitting on my desk. The handouts are available on our website, and if you have any trouble finding them, you can call me. My phone number should be on the Commission's website as well, or email me, and I'll make sure that we get them to you. This hearing is being transcribed by a court reporter, and a transcript of this hearing will be available on ePUC along with all of the other documents related to the rulemaking. I think I have everyone's name here down on the list, but I will call your name and you can speak your comment. Just state your name before when you begin, and that will assist the court reporter and help make the process a little bit more orderly. And with that, I will open up the floor to comment. First up, I have Robin Flatley.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Well, my concern is that I live very close to a pole, a telephone pole, and it's 35 feet from my bedroom. And my concern is that if there were hardware on that telephone pole, that I would be negatively impacted by the frequency and the energy that would be beaming at me 24/7. So I'm concerned that my health, I would be at a health risk to have hardware on the pole. I am more inclined to be interested in 5G that would be connected to the hardware. Like my phone, I have a phone that is connected. It's a home phone that's connected. I don't have a cell phone. And I've done that for a really considered purpose of not to expose myself to any of the EMFs or the radiation, whether it be high or low radiation, to my body and my person. My understanding is that if there is hardware on the street, it's pretty frequent, so they'd be only a couple of feet away from each other, because if I'm moving from A to B, say I'm walking down the street and I'm looking at a movie from my cell phone and I'm watching this or I'm communicating with someone, that what happens is that 5G connected or 4G connected to the telephone pole is sending a beam to me and connecting to my telephone or whatever, tablet, whatever it is I have, and then I'm walking down the street, and then it has to make sure that it has a connection to the next pole, so that I have continuous movie, or whatever it is I'm doing, so that when I walk down the street, that isn't interrupted. And so I have the convenience of having this stream of movie, or whatever communication it is, and it's not interrupted. What I would request is that because the beam itself is powerful, coming from this telephone pole, that when I'm walking down the street, say I'm walking down the street, right, and I've got this thing, and then I have a beam coming from there, and it's coming onto my little apparatus, and I'm walking, and then the next beam's over here. Well, there's somebody in their car doing the same thing, right? So they're driving by with the same beam coming from this telephone pole, and it's going through me, past me, to this other person. So I'm benefiting by watching my movie, and it's just sort of nonstop. But the reality is, then this beam is actually passing me, going through to somebody else driving past, or how about somebody in another house over here, or someone walking down the street over there. So I'm concerned that I'm getting this incredible amount of energy coming through my body, coming through to this thing in my hand, and using my body as a kind of antenna, which is not what I want. I don't want this in my life. The second thing I'm concerned about is not just me, it's also the animals. I love birds and I love animals. And I'm concerned that this thing on the telephone pole is going to affect them as well. You know, everything winged, you know, and everything on the ground, but really pretty close up there. And I know squirrels like to use the telephone poles, and I know, you know, birds land near there, and I don't really want a silent spring. I don't want a racial, I mean, I just really don't want the birds to die. And I'm concerned that, you know, they have this amazing ability in their brains to connect to a magnetic connection, so they know where to fly, and they know when they do their migration, they connect with this energy, and it's disrupted. What I was going to talk about was the brain and the heart. I was going to talk about the fact that the brain is electrical, and that the heart is electrical, and that anything that we introduce that's new will have an impact on the electricity in our brain and our heart. And I'm concerned about that it's not just me, but it's also, there's a telephone pole here, it's a telephone pole there, and then my whole neighborhood is covered with these things that are attached to the telephone poles that will impact everyone in my community. And I'm concerned that we don't know enough. I mean, we know a lot, but we don't know enough to make sure that everybody's safe. Because, you know, as a grandma, that's what I care about. I care about the safety of my grandkids, and I care about the safety of the animals, I care about the safety. And I'm concerned that there isn't enough information and enough focus on the fact that this isn't safe, that we don't know for sure. But I don't know that it's safe. I think anything that's added to is added to. So we have 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and then 5G. And so I'm concerned, you know, that it will change me. It will change my world. It will change the animals and the birds and everything that I love about this planet. I'm afraid of that. So I don't want to see that happen. And if I can get you guys to put it in the ground, make a cable to it, that it would be safer. I don't like it, but it would be safer. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a cell phone for a reason. And I don't have any of those gadgets that everybody has and everybody assumes everybody has. I don't have them. And I made a choice not to have them because I want it to be safer. Because I know all these things that we don't see, they're still out there. You know, we can't see electricity, but we know it's there. We plug in a. So that's my concern, is that I don't want just anyone putting something, some hardware on my telephone pole, and maybe more than somebody, maybe many somebodies, maybe many companies putting, you know, these things on my telephone pole. And I'm so embarrassed. I hate being on camera. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Flatley. Next up, we have Michael Fannin.
Indeed, my name is Michael Fannin, for the record, and I live in Tinmouth, Vermont, spelled Tinmouth, but pronounced Tinmouth. So if you ever come up, don't offend people calling it Tinmouth. I can certainly sympathize with the previous speaker. I share her concerns about the safety of the technology that we will be attaching to these poles in the future. And I have some thoughts about that specifically. From what I've observed, there appears to be a consensus across the aisle in the State House to protect the internet, to provide, internet connectivity to as many Vermonters as possible. And we can all agree that's a good idea. I would just like it to be done as safely as possible. I get great high-speed internet where I live in Tinmouth, delivered over fiber optic cable. The cable is buried and emits no dangerous levels of electromagnetic radiation. I think everyone in Vermont should have it. Years ago, we found ways of building out the phone system. We can do the same again with fiber optic. Since this is possible, why would we be thinking about using a wireless technology that is already saturating our environment with a type of radiation and levels that humanity has never been exposed to before? Why are we the guinea pigs in this grand experiment? I'm sure it's been mentioned before, but I feel the need to repeat that there have been over 2,000 studies done on the effects of non-ionized radiation going back decades, and consensus is that we should use this. Should we use this technology, we should be very, very careful. It can be harmful, it can even be weaponized, and it has been used in warfare. I've noticed while watching testimony concerning 5G in the State House that our representatives there, by the tone of their questions, seem to find this all new to them. And why not? Where have they been exposed to these warnings? There's been almost no mention of it in the media. Most of those on my side of the questions accidentally came upon the issue or were suffering from the effects of current exposure and looking for answers. The latter people can be considered our canaries in the coal mine. They are our own proof of harmful exposure. They just happen to be more sensitive than we are at this point in time. When the National Toxicology Program study was released on Labor Day 4 years ago, I would have missed it myself if I had not already been aware of the issue. One cycle of news on a holiday weekend and then nothing. The study and the Ramazzini study in Italy, which mirrored it, were answering a question that had been whispered about in the general public for years. Yet the public had scarcely a chance to learn what they had proved, and that was that cellular radiation causes cancer. That was old news to us, and it was old news to the industry lobbyists who were given control over the FCC after the FDA began to raise concerns. They had to know about the historical studies themselves since they included language in the statute that says that we cannot consider, quote, the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, unquote, when siting cell towers. Our safety was not their concern. Their behavior was dictated by the corporate fiduciary responsibility to create profit for investors, trumping any other considerations. That's the way we roll in the United States these days. The problem goes deep, but it is our hope that our local representatives, armed with factual information and having the safety of their constituents at heart, will hit the pause button. Forget about allowing hardware on a utility pole suitable for the next more powerful generation of electric smog. We have enough already. The internet at my place works great. Movies download plenty fast for me. And according to VPR's latest poll, 79% of Vermonters are satisfied with the speed of their connections. Let's help the remaining 21% by reaching them with safe fiber optic connection. while I'm at it, I don't see Vermonters clamoring for driverless trucks on our highways, or a surgeon taking their gallbladder out via a laptop in India, or their jobs being replaced by a robot. Such are the future benefits promised by the 5G industry. For 35 years, I've been a volunteer fireman or my town's emergency management director. As a fireman, I responded to real-time crises. As an EMD, I helped plan for crises. In emergency management, we sit around in groups and imagine what could happen and what we do about it, and then go home to a night without sleep. That's my job. I look at the specter of 5G and I see peril on the way. And the frustrating thing is I can't do much about it. You can. That's your job. The public utility commissioners can hit the pause button. Rather than rubber stamping the desires of the telecom industry, they could be asking them for proof of safety and listen to the crickets sing. Because as proven during testimony before the US Senate, the leaders of this industry have no health studies to provide. Think about that. I know that keeping an open mind to the information that we offer can be disturbing. If you begin to take it seriously, then its implications can shake the foundations of your belief in our systems and our institutions. I don't want to cause you sleepless nights like mine, but I can't ignore my moral obligation to warn you about what is coming. That's my job. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you, Mr. Fannin. Next up, we have Annette Smith.
Thank you. I'm Annette Smith. I'm Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment, and I live in Danby, which is next to Timoth.
It's Tim Bow.
So, I want to acknowledge that I have read the rule, and I participated in the workshop for the rule, submitted comments, none of which were in any way influencing the rule, and recognize that there's absolutely nothing in this rule that relates to the public. This rule is entirely about the interrelationship between pole owners and the entities that want to attach to the poles. And as we followed the legislative process and talked to legislators, it was very clear to them that what they were talking about was fiber optic. That their primary purpose with asking for this rule update to be sped along was to deploy fiber optic as efficiently and fast as possible. I noticed that this rule became effective in 1985. It was amended again in 2001, and it was amended again in 2008. So it's been 11 years since it was amended. And I suggest that this rule is woefully deficient for this current update. There is a lot in here that benefits the wireless industry, but there is nothing in here that actually addresses what is already permitted in the state, which is the attachment of canister antennas on top of utility poles. This is one on Fern Street in Burlington. Apologies for the fact that my printer is not behaving well. But this antenna involves the canister on top, some really ugly wiring, quite exposed. It has a box. It seems to have another box on top of it, and a meter. And it's quite literally right in someone's front yard. The frequencies of that antenna compared to the frequencies that are already being put on AT&T's towers, for instance. So what I did was I looked at the specification sheets for many, many recent approvals of antennas to de minimis types through the permitting process. And virtually all of AT&T's FirstNet antennas, the maximum frequency of those being put further away from where people live is about 2,000 690 megahertz or 2.6 gigahertz. This particular antenna has a maximum frequency of 5,950 megahertz or 5.9 gigahertz. And it says in its project, in its narrative, the project also allows AT&T to prepare for implementation of newer technologies, including 5G capabilities, smart cities, and new developments in the Internet of Things. So 5G is mentioned in here, but I actually think that 5G is kind of a red herring for this topic right now. The fact is that we have canister antennas being placed next to residences in the state of Vermont on utility poles without notice to the people who live around them. The man who lived in that house got no notice. Now, I know the notice rules were updated, and so now the adjoining landowner may get notice, but the people who live on either side won't. And they're ugly, and each of the providers is going to want to put something on a pole in an area where they want to build out this type of network. Now, I don't claim to understand why these canister antennas are being put up, and Verizon's had some approvals of some too. So what I'm seeing is the potential for instance, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, and there are some other types of carriers that are smaller that are also operating, and each one is going to want to build out a network, say, in Burlington. And this rule should address how that should happen. And I asked at the workshop, is there, we have a policy of co-location on towers in this state. Is there any plan for how to address several competing providers wanting to build out the same type of network in our communities? And the answer was no. So this is clearly a first come, first serve thing. And it makes, from a regulatory perspective, it makes no sense to me why this rule doesn't contain some standards, some requirements, like is all of this exposed ugly wiring really necessary? And what is our state going to look like if we have all these different providers competing to put things on at practically every pole in the state if each one is going to have their own network? This is just, this requires more planning and more thought. Now, one idea I had was, well, okay, could the PUC ask and require that each of these entities provide a master plan? And literally the day after I came up with that idea, the headline is, AT&T and other carriers want to hide detailed 5G maps from the FCC and the public. So why do they want to hide where they're building these things? Well, maybe because they're starting to see pushback. All around the world, people are pushing back, especially against 5G. And I'm going to give you these things, and this is a very extensive document of all the places that are pushing back against, including all the litigation. Now, as I said, I think that in one respect, 5G is kind of a red herring because we already have an extensive body of health studies on the harm already from 4G. Just 2 studies came out this week that confirm that radio frequency electromagnetic radiation causes DNA damage on the cellular level. And they specifically ruled out thermal effects. So the fact that this can happen now in a helter-skelter manner with no idea what any of these providers are doing. I mean, somebody went and sat in their car under this pole with an AT&T phone and said, I'm only getting 2 bars. Now, I've also read that these new frequencies are pulsed, and so it's very hard to measure them, and you might not measure anything at all. So we are in a whole new area, and I think this rule is totally deficient in addressing this type of wireless build-out. We have a process in place for new towers that has been in place for many years. We have a process in place for swapping out antennas on towers that already exist. We have no specific process in place for how a network of this sort of thing gets built out. And so what I'd like to suggest that the Public Utility Commission do, and I will say that I am disappointed that this hearing and next week's hearing are not before the full commission. I do take somewhat of an offense to that I appreciate very much that you ran a great hearing. The workshop was really good. I felt heard, not that anything that I said got in the rule, but I want to be able to look the public utility commissioners in the eye and tell them that they have a regulatory responsibility to protect public health and safety. And if they are not going to put things in this rule that do that, then they need to pause any further canister antenna attachments on utility poles and go to the legislature in the next session and say, we gotta come up with a plan because we're not ready for this. And we can't do it in this rule in the time frame that you've given us. We know that what was intended was fiber optic cable. We wanna red light that or green light that, but this needs to be addressed. And this rule, you don't have time to do it, and you need to confer with the legislature on what to do about it. And because there are already 5G antennas being put out in places like Geneva, Switzerland, and New York City, where we are getting very serious reports of how immediately people are getting sick, whole buildings full of people are getting sick. And we're just dealing with a lower frequency 5G right now, but we're putting antennas in front of people's homes, and that is completely new, and that needs a new regulatory regime. And this rule isn't doing it, and this should not be further enabled, because the way I see it, the wireless industry is just freeloading on this rule. And they are getting a free ride, and nobody is actually specifically addressing what the intention is here, regardless of the frequency. This is a big threat to the aesthetics of Vermont and to the people who live in the homes nearby, who at the very least should be able to opt out, as this woman would like, so that she doesn't have to get an antenna on a pole in front of her house.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And then last we have Ishana Artra.
Well done.
All right.
Yes. So I just learned about this hearing about half an hour ago.
Oh, no.
So I came straight from work, but I grabbed some of my materials. I'm going to be speaking off the cuff. And I too was at the workshop that I agree was run very respectfully. However, there was no reflection of our comments in the results. And I would like to speak to the issue of health and safety. One of the things I have found striking on the website pages for the Public Utility Commission and the other departments regarding how the public is going to be impacted by infrastructure changes. There's the word safety may be used, but it's not addressed in these policies. The word consumer is used rather than people, rather than children, rather than women, rather than men, rather than them, rather than adults. Vermonters have been reduced to what serves the telecom industry. And I have found that quite disheartening this year. What I witnessed at the State House was a swarm of telecom lobbyists not wearing badges, not signing in, no record, but you can see them literally surrounding the senators that are making decisions that impact telecom and the public. So that, to me, was a huge, huge red flag about the direction that Vermont is taking regarding public health and safety when it comes to pulsed radio wave technology. And pulsed radio wave technology has been documented since the 30s when it was introduced for sonar, when men were using it in the Navy and in other military branches. to cause nosebleeds, migraines, headaches, memory loss, behavioral changes, psychiatric issues. There are literally thousands of reports suggesting that connection, starting in the 30s. And in the 70s, the United States Navy actually collated all of those references into one volume so that it could be studied. And that's a matter of public record. Nothing has happened. Instead, the telecom industry has really infiltrated society, has crossed private property boundaries by pulsing radio waves throughout our neighborhoods, in front of our workplaces, in front of our grocery stores, in front of where social services happen, places we don't have a choice about, whether or not to be there. So that is very concerning to me that Vermont is continuing this tradition of telecom, despite being presented with the facts that have been established literally now by many thousands of international independent studies. And what do I mean when I say independent? A lot of people don't know what that means, so I want to say it for public record here. It means no conflict of interest. It means not paid by anyone who would benefit from a finding of no harm, right? So an independent study means it wasn't funded by telecom, it wasn't funded by somebody who makes antennas, it wasn't funded by anyone who's has stocks or in those companies, right? Independent. Those independent studies show again and again and again internationally for decades upon decades that there is harm caused by pulsed radio wave radiation. Now, I have here summaries of thousands of these studies. There are actually 3 volumes. One of the volumes is on tour right now. So imagine another one right here. These are just summaries of a sampling of the studies that have shown harm. This is readily available. This was presented to the Senate Finance Committee. This was presented at the PUC workshop. There's no reference to it. It's not reflected. The science is not reflected in Vermont's policy for connectivity. Vermont's policy for connectivity right now is unsafe for public health. It's been documented internationally. It's been documented by independent researchers again and again. Now, I also want to show, this is the FCC, Federal Communications Commission's response to the Government Accountability Office. Now, that's our United States government's accountability office, holding the branches of government departments accountable for their mandate, right? The Government Accountability Office wrote a report saying that the FCC is not enforcing its own guidelines and that its guidelines are no longer relevant and need to be addressed. Now, here we have, imagine again a 3rd volume here, plus thousands of other studies showing harm in addition to these. And this is the FCC's response, okay? There's a paragraph in here where the FCC says, yes, our guidelines are no longer relevant. There is a great deal of science, and there's been a great deal of technological evolution that now makes our guidelines irrelevant, and that there is cause to believe that there could be harm caused by pulsed radio wave radiation. So I want to be sure that that's super clear. We have our United States government saying to the FCC, your guidelines need to be updated. You also need to enforce the guidelines that you already have. And we recently saw a report put out, somebody here may know the newspaper, that our cellular phones have now exceeded even the FCC's outrageously high guidelines.
The Chicago Tribune,
Thank you, the Chicago Tribune.
they did their own studies.
Yes, thank you. Independent studies. When do you think the Government Accountability Office made this request of the FCC to update their guidelines? 2012. That's now basically 8 years ago. It's bordering on 8 years. There has been a continued saturation of the American population with pulsed radio wave radiation, exceeding even the FCC's outdated guidelines, exceeding every other country's guidelines except Canada. There's been nothing done. Now, the challenge with 5G and future, we're also looking, they're already talking about 6G and 7G. So this is a matter of gatekeeping. It's not just a matter of 5G. This is a matter of actually setting some standards for public safety so that future generations of pulsed radio wave technology are meet health and safety requirements in Vermont. Well, the challenge with 5G and looking beyond is this. 5G consists of 3 sections of the spectrum of radio waves, not just one, right? We're talking radio waves, microwaves, and millimeter waves. That's never been done before. There are no standards for it. There aren't even any guidelines for it. Right now, this is the Wild West regarding pulsed radio wave technology. The FCC's guidelines, which were already based on a plastic mannequin, not on biological tissue, which were set by engineers, not biologists, not doctors, and already exceed the rest of the world's limits, right? Do not address, contain nowhere in them, and they've never been updated since 1986. They've never been based on these current evolutions of pulsed radio wave technology, the combination of radio wave, microwave, and millimeter wave. No. There is something called power density, which all radio waves use in order to travel. Power density is electrical. It's volts per meter. Volts, that's electrical. It interacts with the human body, our electrical body. This is invisible, just like when you go to the doctor or hospital and they hook up our brains or our hearts to EKGs and EEGs. We can't see any of the electricity, right, that those machines are registering, right? We can't see those, but you sure can feel it when your heart stops, right, or you get palpitations. Well, that's what happens when people who've become overly exposed to pulsed radio wave technology experience heart palpitations. It's electrical. So now they're talking about using different levels of power density, combining them with radio waves, microwaves, and millimeter waves, which there are no standards for, no guidelines for, and all the research is showing harm. There's no, and this is so important to hear, and somehow it gets lost, just like the invisible electricity gets lost in all of this. There's zero science proving that exposure to pulsed radio wave technology is safe. We can prove that my sitting in this chair is safe, but we cannot prove that something all of us involuntarily are inundated by is safe. And we're paying good money for it. iPhones cost $700, right? States are paying good money for it. The infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure, right? And it's not proven safe. In fact, quite the opposite has happened. So in the rulemaking, there is a mention of safety, that the pole owners have, that, and I forget how it's worded now, but the Public Utility Commission is responsible for setting the safety standards that then the pole owners have to abide by. So if we crystal ball this, on public record for the Public Utility Commission, the Senate Finance Committee, all the senators and representatives have all received this information that we're talking about tonight and more proof of harm or cause for applying the precautionary principle. So let's crystal ball this. What does that look like from a liability standpoint for Vermont? For the individuals making decisions? What does that look like? We cannot afford, Vermont cannot afford that kind of burden. So I want to return to feeling disheartened and also say that I hope that we can follow in the footsteps of other leaders that are giving cause for hope that leaders really can take a stand against lobby pressure and make decisions that are in the best interests of people, children, adults, the elderly and children, especially because of water to mass, I forget the ratio, water to density ratio in the human body, especially are harmed most immediately by pulse radiation. So please, as our leaders, please take into consideration the true health and safety of the people of Vermont, because we deserve better than to be treated as telecoms consumers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Did you want to speak?
I know.
Oh, I think we're just wrapping up.
May I have one more,
Absolutely.
please? I'm
Yes.
sorry. Oh, thank you. I want to say just two more things. I'm with EMF Safety for Vermont, and we galvanized, organized around this issue early this year. We have a membership that's steadily growing from the Brattleboro area. The amount of people you see here tonight is probably indicative of a lack of knowledge about tonight's proceeding. But the list is growing. We have, I believe, close to 200 people on the list. Is that correct? Yeah. Thank you. And it is growing. There is serious concern there are even teenagers who have signed the list, who are getting headaches, who are having nosebleeds, who are having memory issues. So I wanted to make that clear, to really give them a voice just by mentioning that as well. And also for me personally, as I own a home, I pay taxes, I live downtown, so there's a lot of walking on the sidewalk, right? It's gotten uglier. The number of wires that are going up on these poles, I used to think of the word charming 20 years ago when I moved here, and it very much saddens me that is no longer how I would describe where I live, because these wires are hideous. And I also don't want to walk down the street and be beamed by, and this is beamforming technology we're talking about with these antennas. That's why we use the word beam. This is not a science fiction sort of hysteria. The industry calls it beamforming. I do not want to walk between this person over here and an antenna as they are downloading some movie while they're, walking with headphones on, wireless headphones on, to the cafe, right? I don't want to walk between them and that. I don't want to drive between someone on this sidewalk and a beam. I deserve to have a choice. Vermont deserves better. Every Vermonter deserves to have a choice about whether or not to be pulsed with radio wave radiation, period. And I certainly deserve that. I've put a lot into this community. So, thank you.
Could I ask John Brabant for Vermonters for a Clean Environment, can I ask a procedural question?
Sure.
Will there be a responsiveness summary provided that will be responsive to each and every comment provided
At the
during
end
this
of the
hearing?
rulemaking process, there is a response to the comments that were filed.
It won't be I was a regulator at one time, and I know sometimes regulators who are disenchanted sometimes with comments presented will just say disagree or not applicable.
No, I think.
And not explain why they disagree or not explain why it's not applicable. So I'm asking, maybe requesting that as in-depth as the commentary has been tonight, and you might see throughout this process, that we receive an equally in-depth response, i.e. why or why not the PUC is not choosing to slow this train down, at least for the 5G aspects of this. It could be bifurcated. It's not going to slow down the cable communication of this of the high-speed internet. Why can't it be bifurcated? And why, if the PUC chooses not to, why the PUC is choosing not to evaluate health and safety study information that has been provided, developed worldwide. And by the way, if you're familiar at all with the legislation that passed, there's been a directive given to the Vermont Department of Health to actually summarize the studies that are out there, the independent studies that Shauna was referencing. And at very least, it's prudent as a regulator to wait for the conclusions of that report and see where that evolves and what the public policy implications and fallout would be at the legislature this coming session. So I just asked, out of respect to the people who have taken the time to do
Right,
this.
there will be a response. I can't tell you what the commission will put in it, but there is a response under the process. There's more comprehensive. The earlier stages of this were what we call an informal rulemaking procedure, so they're developing information. Legislature set the deadline, which hurried that along probably. But as part of the formal rulemaking process, so there is a response to the comments or addressing the comments.
So that was the pre-rulemaking.
That was pre-rulemaking, just in response to the department's petition. And at that point, once it became legislatively mandated, the process takes on sort of a different pace.
Do you understand the mandate to also include 5G rollout on this accelerated pace that this rule would dictate from the legislature?
I don't understand. I don't know either way.
I mean, okay.
As far as I can tell from the legislation, it just addresses the rule and the procedural components of it.
Well, I'd like to speak to that. The FCC issued orders called a regime, they called it a regime, for accelerating wireline backhaul in order to accelerate 5G. And as they put it, in order to, I'll quote part of it, to break down the barriers of local government control. And so they did that by creating One Touch, Make Ready, and other policies that streamline 5G deployment and other deployment as well. And that is what we see in the bill that the Senate Finance Committee passed that we now see reflected in the PUC rule. So there's a absolutely direct relationship between 5G and other future pulsed radio wave radiation evolutions and the PUC new rulemaking. Now, Vermont is one of 10 states that has certain options that the 40 other states don't have. We have a luxury of being a certified state, and I haven't seen any leader advocate on behalf of public health and safety in Vermont or refer to that leverage that we have, that freedom that we have because we have a certificate, because we're a certified state. But yes, absolutely, there's a direct connection between the bill, the rulemaking, and 5G because they use the same words, they set the same terms as the FCC's acceleration order.
Annette Smith, Vermonters for the Environment. And this is the fundamental issue that we have, is that this rule, while deficient in addressing any of this, enables a total change in the way that we have seen telecommunications services. I mean, when I ask you to seriously consider placing a hold on the deployment of more canister antennas in people's neighborhoods, I'd like to ask the Public Utility Commission to look not at what we always hear, the buzzwords, federal preemption, there's nothing we can do, but rather look at what can we do? What are we allowed to do? Speaking to the certification that Vermont has. There have to be ways that this Public Utility Commission can use its regulatory authority to place a hold on this new type of technology. And I'll give you an example of questions that I have no idea how to answer, even though I've been asking qualified people. So my understanding of 5G is that it is frequencies 24, 25 gigahertz up to 80 or 100 gigahertz. But these antennas that are being put on, the canister antennas being put on utility poles in Burlington that say the project also allows AT&T to prepare for implementation of newer technologies, including 5G capabilities, the maximum frequency is 5.9 gigahertz. So that's not the same as what we're hearing about what real 5G is. What's the difference between this low frequency 5G, if it is 5G, or is it just a word game that AT&T is playing, and actual 5G? We don't know, but what we do know is that people are getting sick from radio frequency wireless technology. We hear about children getting headaches in schools, about brain cancer. Diabetes is increased in rats. Studies show that you can actually introduce diabetes into rats by putting them in proximity to radio frequencies. It's one thing that we've been doing with the 2.9 gigahertz antennas up on towers, and we know that those emissions dissipate with distance. But we don't know anything about this. And certainly we as a legislature do not know, because there's been no testimony on it. As much as Ishana has taken this literature to the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Health and Welfare Committee has taken no testimony. No experts have come in and testified, and there are many, many experts all around this country and around the world that are raising huge red flags about this. And you know, when I go out to social gatherings now, strangers who have no idea that I run an environmental organization are coming up to me and saying, what's happened to the birds? Where are all the birds? And I could say the same thing about the mosquitoes, and where are the insects? Right. And there are very good studies that show that the whole navigational system based on magnetics is being disrupted by our creatures. And so this is an extremely serious, life-threatening issue for many people. And to simply say, oh, there's federal preemption, so there's nothing we can do about it. Vermont is a leader. This is the place for Vermont and our commissioners of the Public Utility Commission to really seriously step up here and say, we're not going to be like sheep, and we are going to take a stand here, and we are going to work with our legislature to address these issues, and we're not going to keep putting utility antennas on utility poles in people's neighborhoods without some information about what the potential is for harm, when nobody that I know is clamoring for any of this technology. In fact, what's happening more and more is people are not happy with their cellular service, and they want to get off of phones. I keep seeing stories about how people are coming out with simple phones because they're tired of this smartphone stuff. So this Public Utility Commission is in a position right now, through this pole attachment rule, to make a difference. And then my question is, if not through this rule, then what? Because what we were told by the legislators was, well, you can deal with it through Section 248A. So that means a case-by-case basis, and you know as well as anyone what it takes to participate in that process, and how, especially when it involves putting a canister or antenna on a pole, there's virtually nothing that a citizen can do after the fact. So if not this rule, Where does the public interest get addressed?
I want, if you
Say your name.
Beverlystown, Brattleboro. I just want to layer into what Annette said about the birds and the insects, and I would encourage everyone here to search for wireless silent spring, and you won't have trouble finding it. It's a PDF, and it's quite detailed on the damage to our insect population and our bird population. And just in, I believe it was Missouri, I'm not sure if you saw it, there were several hundred birds that all flew into the Hall of Fame. This Hall of Fame has been there for years and years and years. I haven't been able to totally determine that 5G was turned on, but there were many people commenting, saying that it had been turned on. And they're trying to find out what happened to these birds, but they literally just flew into this wall. And just all at once. And you know, it's suspicious. I mean, if this building had just gone up, maybe it would be of less concern. If 5G wasn't being deployed in major cities, maybe it would be of less concern, but there's a little bit of a coincidence there that I hope to get to the bottom of sometime soon.
Yeah, the invisibility of pulsed radio wave radiation, which is naturally occurring, and also pulsed, which is man-made radiation, is a real big problem. If you Google radiation pattern cell phone, you will see what the industry uses to adjust their antenna specifications in order to decrease and increase gain and reach and all this kind of thing. And they will show you the radiation pattern. They use colors and everything, and you can see these bulbs coming out of a cell phone of literally of radiation that the industry knows about. And that's just the peak area. If they illustrated all of the radiation, it would go out 30 feet or more, right? So what are cell towers doing? What are antennas doing? What are you know, when your computers are on Wi-Fi mode or Bluetooth, then we are all, and you as well, within the radiation pattern. It's happening all the time. This is a meter, and it measures it shows the power density, volts per meter. Remember I mentioned volts, the electrical. That's the pulsing. Let's just back up and have these room. That's just this room. And if I got, you know, closer, right? If you have your cell phone in your pocket, it's very close to parts of your body where there has been shown an increase in cancer and birth defects because sperm are damaged. Eggs, when women carry their cell phones in their purses or in their bras, right? There are tumors that are the shape of cell phones. It's crazy. There are eggs that are damaged. And then we have babies that are born with neurological damage that cannot be repaired. So this is invisible, but it's really not anymore. And if you go to the crosswalk meters and the parking meters downtown, you hold this there. It's more than that. It's more pulsing and it's louder. It's more intense. Under a crosswalk, people don't have a choice. So we are asking for gatekeepers. This has reached a point of really self-harm when policymakers are choosing, despite the science, to do this. Let's just, even in your own self-interest, for all the leaders to think about their families and themselves and their grandchildren.
So I would like to speak again. I don't want this furniture 35 feet from my bedroom. I don't want to have a silent spring. I don't want to have the bugs end their lives and not be on our planet. I don't like where we're headed, and I'm really scared. I'm old, right? I'm 71, so I'm kind of old. But my grandkids are young, and they're just starting out their lives, and they have cell phones. And they don't listen to me. I say, don't put that cell phone against your head. You know, they're like 10 to 15 years old. but they won't listen to me. They don't see the harm, you know? And I'm scared. I'm scared that this, you know, could be the door that shuts on this reality, this life, this world. And it's gonna be everywhere. And we can't get away from it. And this energy can be weaponized. It can be used as a weapon. I mean, that's the scariest thing of all. It's like, what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to our planet? I can't get behind this because somehow I think the human race has a spark of goodness. And if we saw what we were doing to our children, to our planet, to the little animals and the birds and everything that we're doing, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't go towards destruction. We would go towards something more positive. And I have that belief that we're more inclined to do something positive and not go in this direction. There are things we can do that won't take us in that direction. And I love Vermont because I think it's a really radical state. But I'm looking at Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, where I used to live, they've made a decision that they will not have towers near schools. They will not have this energy near schools. They've made a decision. I think New Hampshire's made a decision to look at the impact, the health impact of this 5G, 4G, and they are slowing down. Why can't we? We're a great state. We're good people. You know, we think, well, I mean, look at the people here. Look at the intelligence here. They've collected all this amazing information. My God. I mean, if this doesn't convince people, I don't know what can. Anyway, so that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Tom Wheeler, the former chairman of the FCC, made a public statement, and you can YouTube it. You can search for it and see it on YouTube, where he talks about how, quote unquote, we will not wait for the standards.
And he said it's gonna be in every corner of this country.
Yeah. That was Tom Wheeler. It's the FCC setting the tone. That's not Vermont setting the tone for Vermonters. That's the FCC doing that. And we need standards. Of course we need standards. We have standards for the cars we drive to make sure that they're safe. We have standards for almost everything else in our lives. Now, the bill talks about, that mandates the PUC, right, to do this rulemaking, talks about, and this was not new to this bill, this version of the bill, this was also in the prior version, ubiquitous wireless as the goal for Vermont. Ubiquitous wireless. Now, that section has been co-written by telecom industry, and that's a matter of public record. A telecom representative sat in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and under their scrutiny, because they finally were starting to pay attention after our testimony, they asked. And that telecom representative said, yes, we did make changes to the bill because we thought it would make things easier for Vermont, right? Who in Vermont wants ubiquitous who is screaming for ubiquitous wireless, ubiquitous radio wave radiation? Not us. It makes it easier for telecom, and that's the paradigm shift we're asking for. We're asking for reality to reflect the facts, not telecom propaganda, not telecom lobbyists. We want reality to reflect the scientific facts and what Vermonters really want, not what some Vermonters are being told they want.
One more comment, and that is that we do understand that this rule will come before LCAR. And I would like the commissioners to know that if no changes are made to this rule to address what you're hearing tonight, that we will go to LCAR and we will take our concerns to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules and hope that we can be heard there.
I couldn't wait to be heard. This is so insane. It just seems like I wasn't going to come tonight because I just can feel, I can almost touch this pulsing energy that is invading our bodies and our lives, and I just don't get why we don't step up and say, no, I don't think we're going that direction. I mean, it's so frustrating. I almost didn't come just because of that, because it's real. It's a real thing happening. It's not like a pretend thing. It's really real. And it could spell a really horrible destiny for our planet and our people and all the animals and everything. Plants, everything. I mean, it's a different vibration. We've never, this is a man-made vibration. This is not a natural vibration. This is not what our bodies naturally function on. So we have brain waves and we have heart waves and we have electricity in our bodies. This is not natural to our planet. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I'm glad you came this evening, and I value your opinion, and I want you to know that you're not alone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo that, right? Thank you for coming.
Did you want to add something?
Well, just, there's the safeg.net. It's about having basically everything wired. And I think it's in Sweden. I started to read a book that was here at Brooks that talked about how they use wired technology there, and if they were to use wireless, it would fail, but to get people their medical records, because they do a lot more, I guess, in-home medical visits. And so they were saying, what a travesty it is here in the United States that we're moving toward wireless, deeper and deeper into wireless, when things like at-home medical care won't be able to be done with wireless technology, because it can't handle a lot of the data going back and forth. So anyway, it just was, I had learned about this safeg.net, and it talks about using wired technology so that we can stay safe. Safe, reliable, less hackable.
Yes, right. There's also the secure, I mean, from a purely, for the techie geeks, rather than anybody who's interested in public health and safety, our data security, it's ridiculous to be emphasizing for Vermont an infrastructure that puts all of our private data, our business data, our proprietary data into hackable radio waves. I mean, the military even goes to extreme lengths to secure data that is being transmitted. Far more secure than anything that would ever be done for the public or businesses in Vermont. You know, if we want to attract new businesses, entrepreneurial innovation, inventors, patent makers to Vermont, which a lot of our economy I've read wants to go towards, because they can work from home, they can have small businesses, right? Don't emphasize my suggestion is do not emphasize an infrastructure that is highly hackable. That makes no sense to me. Give them really fast fiber. It's faster than 5G. There have been on numerous occasions when a telecom person will slip up and say, oh, 5G is going to be almost as fast as fiber. Right? It's in print. They say it in interviews. You know, we've already got plenty of speed with fiber. This isn't necessary or wanted.
All right, any further comments from anybody? All right, well, thank you all for coming, and I do apologize if the notice didn't get out. This goes through, for rulemaking, the notice actually goes through the state, and they advertise in the paper, and then it's on our website, and there's also a notice on our, through PUC, so the notice should have gone out through the ordinary channels.
It's just the ordinary public doesn't use those channels.
Right.
So there's a real disconnect
I'm not
between
sure.
public utility commission and actual public connection
I'm not
with
sure
the
whether
public.
channels it would be.
And people don't even know what the PUC is.
Yeah, they don't have a
Right.
clue.
Just like,
It would be a really marvelous, it's beyond gesture, a marvelous contribution to the future of Vermont if the PUC would set up a task force that consisted of the public and others to address the problem you just spoke of. You know, which is, you go through all these channels to communicate and nobody turns up, right? So let's solve that. Let's get the public more involved. Let's create a task force that's sole mission is to increase public attendance.
Well, this is especially hard when you're dealing with a rule that has absolutely no public component in it.
Right,
So
yeah,
there is
yeah,
nothing-
exactly.
I know, so
It's-
where is all this going?
Well,
Yeah.
in the effort of expanding, there is another public hearing next week on Tuesday in Montpelier, so you can tell everyone you know that there is a second, just like this one.
3 hours north of here.
It is 3 hours.
Yeah, so let's start talking about ways to improve a really outmoded form of communication with the public. Okay.
Is that possible?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course it
It's
is.
possible.
Yeah.
For discussion.
Yeah.
Any further comments tonight before we go off the record? Tell your friends, tell everyone you know about this, the hearing, and I believe Commissioner Hoffman will be at the
Oh, really? Because
Montpelier.
it was not on the calendar, so.
The hearing was not on? our
No, the
calendar?
hearing's on the calendar, but it had you and the other hearing officer.
Okay, they may not have put the commissioners on just because my understanding is that Commissioner Hoffman will be there. So if you do want to speak with her, she will be in attendance. But absent,
The community television, what's it called?
BCTV.
BCTV. Right now, EMF Safety for Vermont's show is the most watched show on BCTV addressing this issue.
what's the name, what's the channel?
It's BCTV, Brattleboro Community Television. That would be a good place to promote these events. And also to use language rather than jargon, to use public language. So, you know, cell towers, whatever is going to be immediately understandable by a layperson.
Like Facebook and Front Porch Forum right next to big vehicles almost everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've done all this, like laid out my heart and my soul to you. Where, should there be more people here to affect something? Or are
This will
you
go-
good enough? Or I don't understand.
Well, it's not just me, so I'm here.
Yeah.
This creates a transcript and a record that the commission will review. And then that gets rolled up into the whole rulemaking process. So I'm more of an information gatherer and
Mhm.
attendee, but this ultimately funnels back up to the commission and makes the ultimate decisions on any of these matters.
So what Annette was saying is that there would be other people in Montpelier, and their ears are different than yours?
No, it all
They-
goes through the same channels, it all
Okay.
works the same way, so there will be different people in attendance from the commission at that public hearing. And Ms. Smith had mentioned that she wanted to speak directly to a commissioner, and that there will be one at that hearing. But ultimately, the record, the transcript will make it up to the commission, and it'll be reviewed by the commission as part of the entire rulemaking process.
So you're as good as the commission, basically, is what you're saying.
That far.
Your dad's here, you better say yes.
No, I think, I'm here to listen to your comments, but the
Yeah.
comments ultimately become part of the record, which is what all the decision-making and rulemaking will be based on.
Okay,
The actual public record of this process.
So
thank you.
Thank you for explaining that. So when they look at our comments, is there a set of criteria for lack of a better word, admissibility?
There's no admissibility in a rulemaking process. It's an open, uncontested proceeding, so it really is just input. And there's no threshold for what that input does in a rulemaking. It's the commission considers everything that comes in as part of the package and part of the record and goes from there.
All right.
All right, if anyone has anything else, if not, then we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We look forward to hearing what comes of it.
Certainly.
Here's some bedtime reading. I can email this stuff in, but
You
I
want to-
I want to leave you with that anyway.
Okay, are you able to file them directly? I could ask you to upload things, but It's better if it's under.
I can
your-
submit it as
it's
a
better if
comment.
it's under your login.
Yeah,
Submit
I'll
as
do
a
it,
comment.
yeah.
That way nothing gets lost.
Just think about it, think about that
As
red
long as
light.
your
Near you at all times.
to my computer,
I mean,
Oh,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
not
it's not
interfering
interfering.
anything, it's detecting
Did it interfere with your
it.
computer?
What's that?
Did it interfere?
No, no, I just.
This really.
It's conserved my files and everything.
No, this is
Sort
a
of like
detector,
my
it doesn't,
computer thing.
your
Yeah, no,
computer is
I-
what is radiating, not this, yeah.
So, but think about it, you're in an atmosphere of red light,
Yep. So,
and how much of
I
that
should
are
tell
you
you
there?
guys, when I give you paper, you use stuff
Well,
with paper.
paper.
So-
This though, or is it that?
It's
I know,
it's just
I
using
know.
the record and everything.
Yeah, I will submit it, and
You're
I'll
so
also
sweet,
submit
I
the
hate to
video.
have anything happen to you.
Great, perfect, thank you.
Manufacturer, I've got one.
It's 3 hours driving from here.
I put them out, so I might as well put them back.
Deer on the road.
Yeah.
So I doubt I'll come. I mean, but I'm serious, I mean, I participated in rule things before, and usually there's at
Kid's
least
a
two
good guy, I can tell.
Brother.
And I, you know, this rule doesn't have any public stuff to it, because it sort of feels like we don't really expect the public to weigh in, so there's no point in
His
comment,
mother
but
works from home,
this is
she's
a-
a medical transcription.
this issue is
And
freaky.
we have a landline that is 6 feet
I
off the
mean, you
ground,
can't,
and I
I'm
don't dare
hearing
to
from
call
people
the
who
phone
aren't
company
sleeping at night,
because
they're worried, and
the last time they did it after
talking to
the
some
ice storm,
folks
I had to go back
in a town that has a cell tower
100 yards
closed
through
that
the
hasn't
snow,
been
put
put to the
a ladder
piece.
up and hitch it back up
And
myself. I'm leaving well
their
enough.
level of
Oh.
anxiety, and that is
Like
not
it.
because it's close to a
Take
village
things down.
center, seeing how
Yeah.
this company is
You don't
trying to
want
come
that.
in and
You don't want
provide
that.
wireless technology, which they say will
Sonny,
be
you live there.
and it's going to
Yeah.
present
Yes.
that tower comes in, they're not gonna get it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's gonna be, well, you know, you're already set. And so I'm very disturbed to see how this type of goes out. And,
You guys have a long
you know,
drive.
Michael and I looked at 900 uploads. So we're like, what's the problem?
It's only fair.
But really, that's, he's right, the gold standard really should be that.
Nice night.
So you don't testify?
Yeah, and then like Michael referenced it, yeah, like 79% of people are happy with their.
Yeah, that's right.